All right, Connor. So I just want to do a little catch up on what's happening in Yemen, from the best I could tell. So for anybody who's looking at the map I have up here, I think the Houthis have gained a little bit more territory towards the city of Maarib, than is indicated here. But for most of the audience just listening, the Houthis continue to control Sana'a, from the Saudi border, and even carrying out cross-border operations and holding some territory in like the very south of Saudi Arabia, all the way down the coastline. They still hold Hadeda, and as far as I could tell, that the fighting for that city hasn't flared up. And then if you go down to the city of Taiz, it's I think the fourth most populous city in Yemen. That's been a pretty consistent battle line since 2015, and the battle lines don't seem to have changed there either. The main fighting going on between the Houthis and the Saudi backed government has been from what they call a central Yemeni city, but if anybody's looking, it's actually probably more like two-thirds to three-quarters of the way towards the west of Yemen, but in the central, central north to south. And this is an area known to be more lucrative in like gas and other reserves, hydrocarbon reserves, and stuff like that. And it is, from what I understand, the last population center in what was historically pre 1990 North Yemen that isn't controlled by the Houthis. And so the Houthis have made advances on this city really over the course of this entire year, if not before. But the fighting has really picked up in the last 2 to 3 months. At least, if you're going by the Saudi reports, they claim they're killing hundreds of Houthi every day, if not, 2 or 3 days a week. They're saying over the last 48 hours, we killed 100 number of Houthi fighters. If you add it all up over the past couple of months, it's well into the thousands. I'm very suspicious of it. I mean, it's possible that as the Houthis are sending reinforcements from Sana'a to Mareb, they're just being picked off consistently by the Saudis. But to say that you're killing thousands of fighters and absolutely no civilians sounds very inconsistent in what's happened with the rest of the war in Yemen. So I have a lot of questions about all the details of the fighting for Mareb, but this is a city that apparently, or an area, because it's a city, but outlying areas and everything else, that does have millions of people in it. Apparently, as people have been forced out of other areas of Yemen, they've ended up in Mareb, and now they're having to flee there. So there's a big humanitarian crisis coming from this. I assume as the Houthis push into the city, there's going to be more civilians being killed, more civilians being put into harm's way, not only by Houthi actions, but also by Saudi airstrikes. I also read, at least 2 times in the past, I would say 2 months, the Houthis have been accused, and I'm sure credibly so, of carrying out different kinds of missile strikes against Saudi forces in this area, and claims that they've killed civilians, at least in part, in these strikes. I'm not sure about all who's dying, but I do believe the Houthis are carrying out those kind of strikes. And, with the guidance systems on their missiles, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to understand that or hear that they're hitting non combatant targets with those missiles, either intentionally or not. But the Saudis have definitely ramped up the bombing in the area over the past couple of months. Now, there is also a situation in the south of Yemen, which this is the area that's, at least on international maps labeled controlled by the US Saudi Bat coalition, right? This is aiding and all that. Although for the essentially the whole war, there's been another group in southern Yemen that gets more support from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and this is the Southern Transitional Council, or the STC. And from the best I could tell, they kind of say, well, look, the Houthis have the north. We really don't care. We'd rather be South Yemen again. And so that, they're competing with the kind of Saudi forces for that. And it seems that this relationship ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it seems they're working together, other times there's suicide bombings going off in southern Yemen. And there's conflict and the actual strife and killing between these two groups. And it seems we're more towards a strife time, with the STC recently pushing back and saying that the Saudis aren't living up to their agreements and everything like that. And then one thing I haven't been able to get a whole lot of really good details on, but I think is important, and I want to just mention the island of Skorhoda, which is off the southern coast of Yemen. It's known as the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean. It's like a very diverse ecosystem, and all this is traditionally a Yemeni island. Although, if you look at a map, it's kind of between Yemen and Somalia. But anyways, this has been a Yemeni island forever. The people who live there, I think, consider themselves Yemenis. But the UAE is really trying to move in on that. And I've read recently they've been ramping up their development on the island, potentially damaging some of the natural resources there, the unique diversity that's present on that island, to build economic or military positions. And so, that's quite substantial. And another major casualty of this war will be the island. Now, before we stop talking about Yemen here, Connor, I just want to put out that we are now in November 8th, 2021. At the beginning of 2021, the UN warned that if something didn't happen, 400,000 Yemeni children would starve to death in this year. At the beginning of the year, I don't know. I really didn't think that we would get to the end of the year and I would be sitting here saying, well, we did nothing. So maybe the UN numbers will bear out true. Now, again, this is a UN estimate. Doesn't mean that they're right. They could be, 100,000 off, right? They could be 200,000 off. And it's still absolutely disgusting, horrific that like 200,000 Yemeni children were starved to death this year in a war that the U.S. didn't have to fight, that there's no geopolitical game for the United States to be involved in this, and yet we supported it the whole time. And in November we're doubling down with missile sales to Saudi Arabia. So, Connor, anything I missed on Yemen? Anything you want to touch on?
I'll just point out for the as far as the humanitarian situation goes, Doug cites some more recent information from particularly the UN in his piece, and he says UNICEF's Henrietta Fore in a UN briefing recently said 2.6 million children are now internally displaced, deprived of health care, education, sanitation, and safe water. Yemen's gross domestic product has dropped 40% since 2015. 21 million people, including 11 children, require humanitarian aid. 20 million lack access to health services. And Martin Griffiths, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, warned 5 million people are one step away from succumbing to famine and the diseases that go with it, and 10 million more are right behind them. And Doug mentions that, the old number, like I said, is an old conservative estimate that roughly 250,000 people have died. He says some from military action, 2/3 to 3/4 of the casualties and destruction attributable to the U.S.-backed coalition. Most of the civilians succumbed to indirect causes, widespread disease, malnutrition, and starvation as a result of just the constant bombing of civilian infrastructure, everything under the sun you can imagine, from flocks of sheep to hospitals to food warehouses to farms to bridges, roads, waterworks, sewage, and of course the blockade on top of it. It is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and has been for years and years.
Yep.
The worst thing on a long list of things, the worst thing the U.S. government is doing right now.
Well, it started off as Obama's war. It certainly was Trump's war for 4 years. And now that we're 10 months into this and Biden hasn't done a damn thing to change it, I think we could officially label this genocide over Biden's name too.